Hey everyone, welcome back to Make It Happen Mondays, where we talk about sales, business, entrepreneurship, personal growth, mental health, and everything in between with guests who I truly respect and I think make a positive impact on the world around us. Now, today's conversation is with Dan Sperring. He's the founder of AlignICP, which is focused on helping marketing and sales teams win together and hit their numbers by getting tight on the ICP. And this topic is near and dear to my heart because I've been preaching about it for so long and how I don't think most companies pay enough attention to their ICP and the nuances behind it. Because most companies get their general list of industry size, number of employees, locations, and whatever, and they just go to work. And there is so much more to it. And that's what we unpacked during this conversation. So obviously, we talked about his origin story and how he went from economics to marketing to procurement and then to sales. But I was really curious on what he's seeing out there with ICPs and how companies treat them as the way I perceive them to, or at least my experience has been, and see if it's accurate. Because again, when I do trainings, I always do a training prep doc and I ask them how they break out their tiers so that they can tier out their accounts so they know which ones to focus on. And almost inevitably it comes back, well, enterprise is tier 1, mid-market is tier 2, and SMB is tier 3. And there's just so much more of it that we need to dig into to really get close to it. And right now more than ever, because what your ICP was last year probably isn't the same ICP this year. So we talked about what metrics and characteristics matter when looking for the ideal customer profile, and then really understanding the main 2 or 3 use cases for them. And he dropped a stat that I thought was really interesting. He had referenced a study about companies who sell vertically versus horizontally, right? So he found that the cost of sale in a company that sells anything to anybody, basically horizontally, they spend 41% of their cost of acquisition is on marketing, whereas the ones who are vertical only spend 22%. Which gets to focus and how being hyper specific with who you're going after matters so much. So a lot of good stuff in here. With this one, there was a lot of good tips, tactics, techniques, and thought processes. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Let's make it happen. Dan Sperring, welcome to the Make It Happen Monday podcast, my friend. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. I'm looking forward to this conversation because this is a topic near and dear to my heart. I don't think enough people pay attention to it as far as the details of the ICP. But before we get into all that, Dan, I always like to ask people kind of origin story stuff here, right? Like where you coming from, parents, growing up, where'd you get the itch for sales, business, entrepreneurship, all that fun stuff, because we can read your LinkedIn profile if we want to, but I want to figure out where you came from. So talk to us a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the details here.
Yeah, in terms of my origin story, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs, and so both of my parents had small businesses. So from the time I was 5, I was pumping gas, and back in those days, there was like self-service and full-service gas stations. So I used to, I would wash windows, I would pump gas, I would check the tires, and hustle for tips. And as I graduated from college, I got my first job and realized that there was something financially different about me and the way I approach work than most of the folks I worked with. Knew I eventually wanted to start a business. I talked to a venture capitalist that said, hey, if you want to found a company, you have to learn how to sell. And at that time, I had my first job out of college and I was working in procurement, and eventually made the transition and became a seller. Spent the last maybe 20 years carrying a bag and with a quota.
Nice. So because you went to school for economics, right?
Yep.
Where is it? And you got your MBA in marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So was that a conscious, like I don't know about you, like when I got into college, I had no clue, right? I ended up with marketing because I was like, all right, I guess this is kind of the thing that puts all my stuff together. It was relatively easy compared to the other ones, right? That type of thing. Did you consciously choose marketing, like, cause that's the direction you wanted to go in? Or was that something more you just figured out, all right, this kind of feels right?
Yeah. And so the story in terms of economics, I always had an interest in understanding how things worked. And I knew I had like a very much like a business mind. And so I took economics because I thought that would help me understand how companies grow and are built. And what I learned was that it was very abstract and had very little to do with kind of the day-to-day operations of a company. And then when I ended up going back to school to do my MBA, I knew I wanted to become a seller, and the closest thing to sales was really marketing. So I studied everything I could related to marketing so that I could be a seller.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's for me. Yeah, it's like we always evolve, right? And then you kind of figure out, well, like that's your point, like economics. Like, okay, this is interesting, but now I'm out in the real world, and none of this shit actually matters, right?
Exactly.
It's the same thing. Well, for me, it was kind of the same thing with marketing. It's like I went to school. I guess I learned marketing. I don't remember a single thing that I learned back then, but I remember coming into the real world being like, wait a minute, none of what they're talking about for these jobs is anything that I actually learned how to do. So I don't know about this, right? And then I kind of got into sales. I was fortunate that I evolved into sales because I was have a DeWalt, it was under a sales umbrella, but it was really event marketing. So it was a nice graduation from marketing to event marketing to then sales a little bit and then hardcore sales with Xerox. But yeah, it's an interesting, everybody's journey is always different. So what made you, throughout the career of all the different positions you've had, what made you passionate about this topic, about ideal customer profiles, right? Because it's a niche component of what we do, but it's so critical in so many ways. But talk to me about through your experience where you found why this was so important and why it was underserviced that you wanted to create a business around it.
Yeah. And so it really stems back to 2013. And I was incredibly fortunate to go to work for a rapidly scaling startup. They were first to market with a mobile messaging solution and raised a bunch of money and just had like exceptional, extraordinary growth. And so I went to work there as a strategic account manager, and I was working with a lot of our largest customers. And at that moment in time, there wasn't really much segmentation. It was more of like, hey, if you have accounts that are over a certain threshold in spend, those were yours. And then what happened over time was I ended up taking over a new territory that was very much based on the East Coast and primarily out of New York. And we had a large clustering of media companies. And so imagine, the largest, biggest, and baddest media companies in the world, like NBC, CBS. As I traveled out there to meet with those clients on a regular basis, what became very clear was that the way in which they're using our technology was foundationally different than the way that everyone else was using our technology. And at one point I was in a meeting and we were kind of the de facto standard for, across media for this type of technology. And during a conversation, and by this time I'd been there maybe 2.5, 3 years, I was meeting with a customer who was using our technology, and he was exceptionally frustrated with me. And he was explaining about their use case and what they're doing and talking about the deficiencies in our product. And as I was listening, it became very clear to me that his expectation in terms of how the world thinks of our technology wasn't actually shared in terms of how we thought of our technology. And what I saw was that all media customers, they had the same collection of expectations and use cases from our tech. And so think about this idea of like, well, they just use APIs where all of our other customers are using a UI. And so there's a lot of things related to like segmentation and targeting. There was just a ton of unique aspects to that use case related to media companies that we didn't even understand as a business. And as I brought those insights back to kind of the mothership and shared that with our product organization, what became really clear was that the use case, the value realization for that one segment was foundationally different from all the other ones. And we as a business didn't even really have a deep understanding of that. And so as a really more of an account manager who owned a net revenue retention number, and was on the hook for renewals and bookings, what became really clear was our ability to have success with accounts was largely driven by the use cases for each one of these verticals. And we had been very fortunate to grow without even having a deep understanding of that. What eventually happened within that space or category was there was two major companies that had a lot of success kind of niching down in particular use cases and personas. And both of those companies have gone public. And so one of them is Twilio, that was really focused on providing more like text messaging based solutions to developers. And then there's another company by the name of Brace who also went public that's focusing on solving this problem for marketers. And so without that clear focus, what happens is companies often struggle to grow because they're really optimized for no one. And so that was one of the big learnings that I had on that journey. And for me, in some respects, it was kind of a missed opportunity in the sense that, I could have been one of those people potentially ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. And that wasn't me, and that wasn't our collective team who I spent 7 years kind of going the battle with to try to win a market. So it was a pretty major missed opportunity.
Yeah. And because I always thought, most and I'm curious from you, you have more insight than I do on this, because it's always amazing. Still to this day, it's amazing to me when I do a training for a client. I'll ask, hey, I do a training prep thing and I intake form, and I say, okay, how do you tier out your accounts? Like, what are the nuances between your tier 1s, tier 2s, and tier 3s? And I want to say 80 to 95% of the time, quite frankly, it's based on revenue potential or size. That's literally like, it's almost like, well, enterprise is tier 1, mid-market's tier 2, and SMB is tier 3. It's like, okay. And I bring them through a very basic framework, but I think a pretty good one of, okay, yeah, we can all do the Zoom info stuff of like, okay, how many, what employees, how many employees, what's the revenue? Blah, blah, blah. But that tells such a fraction of the story. That gets us down to, okay, you kind of look like a duck, smell like a duck. But then there's so many nuances underneath that. Like, I talk them through, like, what kind of tech stack do you have? Like, who's the competition in there? Where are they on the growth stage of their business? Who are their customers? I even get into the details of like, okay, let's look at their ICP. Like, who did they sell to? And I use this as a great example of, like, when the shit hit the fan. I remember back, it was like this I forget what it was. There's a couple of times of shit hit the fan in my career. And everybody was telling me that, hey, John, you got to get out of SaaS. You got to get out of tech, right? Because it's just too volatile. And I was like, but my brand, I think I've spent all my life in tech and SaaS, and I don't have a brand outside, and I don't know how to do. So like, how can I stay in tech? Oh, this was 2023. It was one that was getting
the SaaSacre, it was called.
Yeah. And I was like, how do I stay in SaaS and tech without getting slaughtered by SaaS and tech? And I revisited my ICP, and I said, well, let me look at their ICP. And what I realized was, if you were a tech company selling to tech companies, right? If you were SaaS selling with SaaS, fuck it. Like, it wasn't even worth making a phone call to you, right? Yeah. But if you were SaaS selling outside of SaaS, so if your website, you have financial services or retail or something like that, you were actually doing okay, because those industries weren't getting as beat up. So with a slight shift in my ICP to think about their ICP, I started getting traction again. So first, let's start with, how am I wrong that most companies take a very generic approach to ICPs? Like, what's your general sense of how most people say, okay, let me look at this addressable market and do the stupid, Shark Tank thing. Well, if I just get 1% of this massive $1 trillion market, and then they kick them out immediately. So first, let's start with what's your experience and how people start, and why they start with such limited data.
So there's 3 ways in which companies can approach this problem. So one of the ways is they do an in-house analysis where they're like, okay, we're going to, take a bunch of Zoom info data. We'll take some CRM data. We'll sit down with our finance team. And what happens when clients end up doing that work is they don't have the right taxonomy to think properly about how to identify the ICP. And so what they end up doing is they look at 3 variables when they do this work in-house, and I'll describe these as anchor variables. And so the first one they'll look at is like, what are our win rates? Number 2 is, what is the average deal size? And then number 3 is, what are the days to close? And so if you really kind of distill what those metrics are, that's telling you more around like market message fit. But what it's not really even attempting to quantify is, are these customers ones in which, once you sell to, will derive value from their investment in your technology and continue to not only renew, but expand over time, and then ideally drive inbound, is really what we're trying to do in terms of building the flywheel. So that's one approach. The second approach is companies will hire a third party, like management consulting firm, like a Boston Consulting or McKinsey, who will do the work, but they'll often use the very same kind of framework that I just talked about related to those more market message fit. And then the third way that companies do this is with their MarTech tools. And so they'll expect that, hey, for example, in Marketo, we have our segments defined. And so that's what's really driving this. But none of those approaches are creating the right taxonomy. And then the second piece is, even once you have the right taxonomy applied, you identify your target account list, there's not an easy way to operationalize it. And so what we see time and time again is that the marketing team will actually be marketing to one audience, and then the sales team is selling, they're like doing their cold outreach to a different audience. And under that situation, what it does is it drives up your customer acquisition cost. And then it just slows everything down because the sellers aren't getting marketing air cover. And marketing potentially is generating leads that the sales team knows aren't good quality. And so according to HubSpot, 93% of sellers feel that marketing does not consistently generate high quality leads.
Yeah, I mean, that just reinforces the sales and marketing divide, as it always has been. So in lieu of any great, what is the right taxonomy? Like, what should we be looking for? Like, if win rates, ACV, and deal time to close are not really the lead, I mean, they might be some indicator.
Yeah.
But what are the ones that if you were to say, these are the top 5, top 10 things that we look at to really define what a real ICP looks like, right?
Yeah. And
what would those things be?
Yeah, great question. So we have a segmentation taxonomy that kind of breaks this down. And what I would say is that the win rates, average deal size, and days to close, like, those are critically important because, if we're not hitting our number at some point, management team will find someone who will. And so we can't disregard those. But what we've done is we've created, think of it as almost like a rubric that prioritizes use case. And so what we've seen time and time again is within SaaS, unless you're Oracle or Microsoft, your SaaS product is probably really good at solving problems related to maybe 2 to 3 use cases. And outside of that third use case, like 4th, 5th, and 6th, your product probably falls down and doesn't do a very good job. So especially as a seller, what you want to do is have a deep understanding of what those use cases are upfront during that qualification process. But we believe the use case is really kind of the North Star kind of variable to focus on. And then kind of as you start to think about the next priorities, what it's going to be is actually retention. So like logo retention, and then net revenue retention, and then finally customer lifetime value. And so what you'll see, John, is that, and this is consistent across every single client we've worked with, as well as, my 20 years as a seller, what we'll see is like lifetime value for a particular use case will be like 3 or 4x that other use cases. And so if a certain customer is worth like $2 million versus 500,000, but their win rate is slightly lower, the answer isn't that, hey, we shouldn't be selling to them because the win rate's lower. The answer is, how do we improve our market message fit so we can increase our win rates? And so we can be acquiring the customers that are going to help us create that compound annual growth rates. And so part of the reason why I care so much about this topic is because as someone who's owned revenue and has been expected to create consistent, predictable revenue growth, you can't do it if you're churning customers. It's just not possible. And so if you close a deal this year, the expectation is you're going to grow the business 20%, which means that if you lose that customer, you have to grow at 20 plus what you lost. And that right there will kill you as a revenue leader.
How much does this change now compared to when you started this, right? Because I feel like things are moving so fast right now that you could get caught in a pretty dangerous game here of looking at a previous company's lifetime value of, hey, they'd been with us for 3 or 4 years based on where we were and what our product was. But now we got to add AI to this. We got to do this. And that client might churn pretty soon because you're now not exactly doing right, or there may be a laggard or something like that.
Yeah.
So I feel like there might be, because the future is so unknown, if we look at some of these indicators right now, they might not be the right indicators to look at. So how do you plan for those variables, if you will, when you're looking at the ICP?
Yeah, I mean, so you're absolutely right. Markets are dynamic and they're forever changing. And so that's one of the big problems that we're focused on solving, which is ultimately really what we're quantifying is the concept of product market fit. And that's something that we need to be measuring on ongoing ways. And so other KPIs that we haven't talked about that I would argue are just foundationally important, especially going to your point around what I'll call leading indicators, would be things like product adoption. Like, hey, is the client still using the product? Or have they ever even really adopted the product in the first place? Other things I care about are things like NPS, like, hey, is it the NPS in the tank? So the average for enterprise SaaS is 47 right now. And so is it going down? And so as you start to piece these variables together, you can get a pretty good understanding of kind of the health of a particular segment. I don't know if that helps.
Well,
Yes.
how much? So like, let's look at product adoption, right? And let's marry that to the 2 to 3 use cases. I have this whole thing of sell to the 20%, which is my theory or hypothesis that most people only pick any product or service you own. Most people only use 10 to 20% of the functionality, whatever that product or service is.
Yeah.
And so because of that, that's how they buy. They buy on the 10 to 20% of stuff that's most relevant to them. And then it's customer success's job to then get them to adopt the rest of it. But really, It's that use case of why I'm using this. So I guess like, is adopt, I mean, obviously if they adopt the full suite, that's a gem, right? But there could be some clients that only adopt the 20%, but are still fantastic clients. So
Absolutely.
How do you balance like, hey, our main use case, they're crushing it with, but they haven't adopted anything else. So Is that a good or a bad thing? And should I look for more companies like that? Or should I really be focusing on the ones that we can add the full suite of services to?
Yeah. And so, man, you're spot on. So every software company runs into a situation where they have basically feature bloat. And to kind of to double click into that idea, as we build products, we tend to do more of like an MVP thing. We get the basic out, and then we continue to iterate and improve on it. And over time, what the customer initially purchased to what they have 3 years later is foundationally different. And you're absolutely right. Like 99% of the customers are not actually keeping up with the pace of innovation of your software company. And so going back to this idea of product adoption and use cases, really what we care about is less about whether or not the client's using, all 35 features. What we care about is what like 3 features have to be used in order to accomplish the goals associated with the use case. And so, for example, a particular type of customer may need to and this is something from Mark Robert's that I think is beautiful about the work he's done in Science of Scaling is doing an analysis to understand, like with Slack, I think it's when a customer has sent 2,000 Slack messages, there's a 90% chance that account will be retained. And so for every business, the combination of features that align with the adoption of the use case is really what matters. And then being able to actually monitor that over time. And to be really frank, John, I don't think there's many companies that are effectively measuring that today. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But ultimately, that's where we want to get to in terms of a business and creating, successful customers and ones that are raving fans that are helping us build those flywheels.
So adoption. So where does this fit? So say we get a tight one, right? And we're pretty clear on that and we are assigning territories. How do we align kind of that with the sales reps' actions and reinforce them focusing on this? Because, it'd be great if we could all have a subset list of 10 perfect ICPs, and I spent all my time doing research and being value add and ABM to that whole group. And that's just not reality. Most companies got to grow a little bit faster so they have a bigger TAM and they can go for it. So what's the balance of the hyper focus on the exact ICP versus the peripheral, like, hey, they're kind of ICP, and how do you manage that with the quality and quantity, right? Assuming that we have segmentation of SMB, mid-market, enterprise, and each one of them has their own flair. There's always going to be that balance of quality and quantity. So how do you operationalize it, guess, so that they're focusing on the right accounts, but they're not limiting themselves because the revenue potential is just not there for that small subset?
Sure. And just that one clarifying question for you, is more in the eyes of the seller, in terms of their territory?
I think how does management implement it? Like, and is technology the answer, basically, where we're just going to serve up the reps have no autonomy on it. It's just, we're going to give you the accounts and this is the ones you got to focus on. Or is there kind of a partnership with leadership and sales to help curate those and understand different approaches?
Okay. No, thank you for the additional context. So I am a big believer in, we want sellers to have as much autonomy as possible, because we want them to really kind of buy into who it is they're targeting and have some skin in the game. Now there's definitely there's a lot of gray and there's some wrinkles here. And so in terms of how we go about operationalizing these ideas, you're absolutely right. We have, what we refer to as ICP segments are clearly like in the target. And then what every company is going to have is emerging segments and ICP segments. And so what happens over time, like as companies get to like, call it 50 million, 100 million, what happens is there ends up being this organic segments that show up within the customer base that arrive not because we're marketing to them, but because they're hand raisers. And they're like, hey, we need your technology. It's helpful. But most companies aren't really aware that that segment exists. And so what we do is we identify those as emerging ICP segments, and where you have a really strong track record of performance. Now, getting into, so that's maybe thinking about it more from like, I'll call it a RevOps perspective. Now, if we were to double click into from a seller's perspective, in terms of, where are they investing their time and energy? So within your territory, we all know that territories are not built equally. And there's massive variations in the quality of the accounts within a particular territory. And with that in mind, what I have done as a seller is paid a huge amount of attention to the deals that are closing, the size of them, and then trying to understand, of those, those marquee accounts that we've closed, which one of them of those do I have within my patch? And then think about, how do I get really strategic about investing my time and energy so that I'm going to have the most success possible, with that book of business. And so in terms of this idea of the sellers going out and picking their accounts, if I were to think about it from more of an organizational perspective, I've seen very specific examples with clients that we've worked with where that actually ends up creating a lot of churn problems. And so I think the best case scenario would be one in which the territories are constructed where they're large enough where the sellers can pick and choose which accounts they really want to invest their time in, and then leveraging those insights to double down on the ones, and ideally get marketing air cover too. Like it shouldn't be a solo sport. Yeah.
I used to have my team, so we would go through the ICP exercise to get tight, and then I'd say, okay, here's the details. Now set up your lists and sales nav and all that fun stuff, and they would have to come to me with their top 25, right? But before they could even engage with their top 25 or start going after them, I said, okay, one more layer here before you go after these accounts. I need you to go and look at these accounts and come back to me and tell me a reason why you personally want to work with that company.
Amen. Yeah.
I need you to have a connection to it. And I don't care what it is. The product is awesome. Like their values are really strong on their website. Their mission is fantastic. Or their leadership is really good. Whatever it is, so that you can make that actual connection. Because when you can make the connection to why you want to work with them, not just because they fit your ICP, well, then your messaging becomes a lot more genuine. right? And
Absolutely.
that comes through when you're reaching out to them and creating your campaigns and your approaches and your strategies. And so that layer of like, okay, there's some autonomy here, right? Because I'm going to give you the framework and you're going to get the details here, but you get to go choose who they are. And then when you choose who they are, you need to come back and tell me why you want to personally work with them. And that became a really good, just way for them to start to give a shit about the client as opposed to just treating them as another, okay, here's my top 25 and you have to go after the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one. So many people are stuck in this. Oh, I got to hit my cadences. Oh, I got to do my 50 dials. Oh, I got to call these clients. And I always talk about the give a shit factor, right? It's like your results aren't going to change until, and I told this to Morgan, I've said this a bunch of times on the podcast, like I said, look, your results aren't going to change until one thing does. It's like, what? So you start giving a shit.
Yeah.
And then once you start giving a shit, and I mean that, like care about them as a person, care about them as, have some empathy, think about them as like waking up in the morning and the kids and the boss yelling at them and those type of things. Now all of a sudden it becomes real. And so how do you layer on that with the work that you do, right? So we can all get the demographics and firmographics and all this different stuff and it can produce these perfect, this is the case, but how do you coach the organization, whether it's leadership or the reps, to make that extra connection to give a shit about it?
Yeah. And so, man, I have some great kind of personal learnings on my journey and that very much tie into exactly what you're talking about. So 2 examples I can provide. The first one was me as a new logo hunter. Man, this is probably like 2005. And so my book of business was in the state of Oregon, where I live. And one of the larger accounts, prospect accounts we had was the company called Schnitzer Steel. And they're probably back in the day, they were like a $2-3 billion company. And so in terms of my book of business, what I did was, I'd use Google News and I set up these alerts for all my accounts. And so every day, I'd get in the office, this is obviously before COVID. The first thing I would do is I'd go through my news list to see what was going on with my accounts. And, coincidentally, there was one day where I had this account for like 8 months and I tried all these different things and got nowhere. One day I get home from work and, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal is an article about Schnitzer Steel and how their company's like blowing up and doing really well. And, and so I read the article in the Wall Street Journal, and the Wall Street Journal was just like full of all of these areas in which we could help them grow faster. And so like one of the stories is so with Schnitzer Steel, they have several lines of business and one of them is called pick and pull. So like if your car gets totaled, your insurance company will sell it to pick and pull. And then, they call them like shade tree mechanics will go out and like get parts for their cars. And so so I get this article and like on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, there's a guy that goes out and buys these salvaged cars. And so, there's a clear way that we could help him by like allowing him to connect his laptop, to the cellular the cellular network. Like I worked for Verizon Business and how he could basically find more cars faster. And so I put together this big, it was like a binder that kind of took quotes out of the Wall Street Journal article and then tied it back to our business and how we could help. And one of in the article, this guy that ends up buying these salvaged cars, his favorite car to buy was his 63 Impala. So I went down to Target and I bought a big ass 63 Impala, and it like the doors would open. And so myself and some colleagues, we put my business card in the trunk, and then we like taped it, and then we put our logo on the side. So then I walked this big ass package down to their headquarters, and we went down to their admin and said, "Hey, this is for your CIO." And so, so she took it, and then about a week later, I get a call from, he's like the director of like information security. I get a call, "Hey, can you come down? I'm interested in meeting with you guys." So I go down and I meet with the guy, and didn't really have, it was kind of a strange, like, it was one of those like there wasn't a clear, like as you go through BANT, there wasn't a clear, like, this guy clearly had budget, he had authority. There wasn't a clear need. It was like, you're meeting with me. Well, then I started getting, as they would spin up location, I'd start to get emails saying, hey, do you want to bid on this? And so then we'd start, I'd send in bids on certain projects. And then the strangest thing happened, which is we didn't win any business, but the strangest thing happened, which was, I ended up getting a call from our competitor. And what I didn't know at the time was that they were struggling in that account, and they just had like a major like data center outage, and the account, they're about to lose it. And then that same week they're about to lose the account, I delivered that package. So what happened was, I got my next job because I was just doing my job. I was trying to sell stuff, but I was creating these major challenges for our competitor. And I ended up increasing my OTE 100%. Like I went from 75 to 150, this is back in the day, but it boiled down to the fact that this competitor were seeing me in that account and other accounts doing similar types of things. But to your point, I gave a shit. Like it wasn't like, I wasn't just like, trying to sell ice to Eskimos. I was like trying to help a customer be more successful. And so because of that story, that ended up being a story that I would tell my account management teams. And we ended up, really cool story with, EA Sports, down in, San Mateo. They have some pretty amazing, obviously video games, and one of them was FIFA. And one of our AMs had like a small foothold in that account. And she ended up doing a very similar thing or talking about as they moved to like mobile apps, how there was an opportunity to use our technology to really drive much more usage and engagement from those people who download the app and just don't use it very often. And so, and luckily she wasn't poached, but she had a very similar situation where she built out these individual playing cards of like the FIFA athletes, and kind of linked that to them kind of generating more revenue. And she got tons of meetings from that campaign. So yeah, I'm all in on kind of these ideas that you're talking about, and I've seen them work firsthand.
Yeah, and the thing that it's always the balance, right? Is the need for growth and high, go with the balance of quality.
Yeah,
and I hope if there is anything that came out of the slaughter of 2023, it was to realize quality matters over quantity, right? And we need to slow down to speed up in some ways, but I still am not seeing it out there, quite frankly. I'm still seeing the volume play and everybody trying to do personalization at scale, and AI is the answer, but it's just not. It's just the real shit is the real shit, and it doesn't. Like I was actually quite frustrated the other night with with my wife. She's trying to prospect into her target account. She's like, I just gotta do it because she's a CEO. And she's like, I gotta start selling these dashboards. So I just need to, build it out. I go, I can give you some template thing that you can send out to 100, but that's not going to make a difference. Like you need to sit down, half hour to an hour of every single account, go in, do some research, figure out what your strategy is, all this other stuff, create a hypothesis, do this. She's like, I just don't have time for that. I'm like, then I don't know what to tell you. You know what I mean? And then what we did was we sat down and, again, my approach could be a lot better. But then we sat down and we said, all right, let's just pick one account. Let's take a look at the website, right? Let's look at this. Okay, cool. That's something neat. All right. We have a value statement there. What about this? What about that? So, okay, cool. Well, now let's craft these messages in this way, and then let's figure out ways to add value. And what's interesting to me right now is I've always struggled with this. I tell people all the time, like, you gotta add value, right? Like in every touch and everything, you gotta add value. But that's kind of hard to do, quite frankly. Is what kind of value? It's like for me, and I joke around, like, I'm a sales guy selling sales training to sales guys. You know what I mean? Like I'm a crackhead selling crack to crackheads. It's not that hard for me to, and I have a backpack of tips and techniques and tools and resources. So I could reach out to a VP of sales and be like, yo, have you seen this? And like, holy shit, I've never seen that before. But when you talk to like a 22-year-old kid who's selling at cybersecurity to CISOs, like value is that person going to bring to that CISO? But now it's actually easier than ever. Because what I don't think a lot of people are doing right now or understand is ChatGPT, the deep research shit. Dude, Like the other day, like I can go in and say, I'm trying to add value to a CISO in the cybersecurity space. I'm a 22-year-old kid. I have no idea what I'm doing. What are 5 ideas of content that you, ChatGPT, can go do deep research for me on that would add value to that CISO's life? And it'll say, oh, well, we could do this, 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 and this. It's like, okay, cool. Go do deep research on that and create a 5-page white paper that extracts explicit data on this very specific topic on these type of things. And it'll do it for you.
Yeah.
And then you fire that off to the CISO and be like, hey, not sure if you were, I did this data analysis on this, that, and the other thing, thought you might be, right? So there's actually so many more ways now to be thoughtful, to give a shit. You just got to kind of break through that barrier. When do you see reps, is there for you in your career, you know, who you've worked with and the clients that you worked with, do you see that there's almost like a light bulb moment in some, or is it just kind of, it is what it is. It's all over the place. Some people get it, some people don't. But is there a point in somebody's career where they say, I got to get out of this machine, right? To just keep cranking this shit out and actually start to give a shit. Is it a forcing function? Is it a realization? Is it a leadership thing? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. And so, man, there's a lot that you said there, John, and there's so many things I kind of want to almost go back and touch on because I think they're really important. To your point, this idea of quantity versus quality, I do think there is a way to use AI to improve quality and do it in a much more efficient way. At the same time, kind of going back to this idea of like giving a shit, like when I think about kind of, and some of this gets more into just values, right? And they're really tough things to kind of coach, but going back into values, what I've seen consistently is the most successful people in the world are ones that they're probably helping a lot more people than I am. And what we end up doing is we end up focusing on ourselves and like, how do we, you know, how does Dan Sperring become more successful? And so what we end up doing is saying, okay, well, I need to close more deals. And so I need to, you know, triple down on, you know, the volume. But the reality is that as you take a step back and you start to think about how do I hit my number, and chances are if you can close, we'll call them 5 deals that are meaty, you're going to have an amazing quarter or amazing year that kind of like when you factor in all the other things that potentially will just organically show up. So under that construct of, wow, within those 5 accounts, if I can help 10 or 15 or 20 people be more successful. And the only really way to help them be more successful starts with understanding how they define success. And what I have found, and it's like the level of effort's really not that hard. Like if you set up, like literally you can set up a Google News feed in like 20 minutes and you can have your, you know, I'll call them your top 15 or 20 accounts. And if every day you have like part of your rhythm and your motion is to say, okay, I'm just going to read this and see like, okay, what's new within this target account list, what you'll end up finding like within 3 months of doing that, you're going to know as much, if not more than the people who actually work there. And so I have another example where Adobe, actually, no, it wasn't Adobe. Adobe bought a customer of mine called, it's a CAD software. I'm struggling to remember the name of it. But
PTC and Dassault, PTC.
Yeah, it's one of like the biggest AutoCAD software out there. But anyways, I'm struggling, man. And so every day I would read the you know, kind of the latest and greatest about this company. And then eventually there was an inbound that came in and I jumped on the phone with this gal, and the amount of like having like studied their company for 6 months, like, man, we had like the greatest discussion. And, you know, she told me like the piece of the business that she was working on, and their business was blowing up because of all these 3D printers. And, you know, we could kind of nerd out on that. I knew like what websites that they owned where people could upload like designs to, you know, build these things. And so point being is, I I think some of it's just about is having like a really good rhythm. And every day I'm going to show up and learn, just a touch more about a handful of accounts. And it's actually, I don't really think it's that hard, to be honest with you.
No. And that's the sad thing. It's really not, especially now with the AI stuff. Like it's a joke how easy shit is to find out. And that's why I'm ruthless these days with sales reps trying to sell me shit. I mean, ruthless, because there is zero excuse not to come prepared to a conversation and to skip all the bullshit of, oh, tell me about your business and your priorities and what keeps you up at night and all those dumbass
top 3 initiatives. Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, this is what I do. And I encourage everybody who takes sales calls, who's listening to this, I encourage to ask this question on the first call when the kid picks up the phone and gets on a Zoom call. I do this every time, and I'll say, hey, before we get started here, tell me a little bit about what you know about me and the business and that type of stuff, just so I can get a temperature check here. Ask that question.
Yeah.
And you will be amazed at how few sales professionals can give you any substance to that answer. I did 20 of these a while back. 20 calls. I took 20 sales calls, and that question I asked, 14 out of 20 couldn't even tell me I did sales training.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
And I get off, and by the way, I'm like, okay, so you wasted my time. I'm going to take it back, and I just hang up the phone. No matter how much I need the product, service, whatever it is, I will not deal with that sales rep. And I'll go find somebody else to do it. And by the way, I encourage every buyer to do that, because shame on you as a sales professional for not showing up prepared to a conversation at this point. Shame on you. I mean, it takes less than a second. You go on ChatGPT and say, tell me about this business as quickly as possible. Give me 5 questions that I could ask that make it sound like I know what I'm talking about. Like, it's ridiculous. So, awesome, man. Well, where do you see this going? I mean, with things moving, with what you're working on, like from a technology standpoint, are we headed towards a world where this is all going to be kind of automated for us, where like AI is going to be able to scrape our database, find out all that information for us, and then go look at the addressable market and suck that, and then feed us the information that we need when we need it? Is that where we're headed right now? Or do you think there's still going to be a significant amount of manual labor involved in this from the near future?
When you take a few steps back and you look at how we as B2B SaaS professionals go to market, we all know there's massive amounts of waste and inefficiencies in the process. And so where I think this is headed is there's an opportunity, and it's pretty fascinating. So others have done some work in this space that I'm just massive fans of. So one of them, his name is David Spitz, and he did a study where he looked at public SaaS companies, and he broke them down into 2 populations. Horizontal SaaS companies, ones that sell across many different industries. He compared them to vertical SaaS companies that are just focused on, for example, healthcare or just focused on retail. And what he was able to demonstrate was that the vertical SaaS companies spend about 50% less on sales and marketing and grow at the same rate.
Really?
Yeah. And so he compared identical companies with identical size in terms of ARR, and then almost identical growth rates. And so if you were to step back and you were to ask yourself, well, what's different about vertical SaaS versus horizontal SaaS? What's different is the entire company is focused on building and selling to the same identical buyers, industries, as well as against the same use cases. And so if you were to step back and say, okay, for the majority of the market, like 95% of the market, we're selling horizontal solutions to many different types of buyers and personas. Where this is going is a place in which every company knows exactly who their ICP is, down to X number of accounts. So there's 10,530 accounts in our ICP. We're doing business with 1,000 of them. Where this is going is that the ad spend, and so like the days of, there's this old kind of adage that as a marketer, I know I'm wasting 50% of my budget. I just don't know where I'm wasting it. Those days are going away. And what will happen is that we through that deep understanding of who our ICP is, ad networks are sophisticated enough today where we can just market to those accounts and actually down to those individual people. So what's fascinating about this is where I believe this is going is that the go-to-market process that spans marketing, sales, and customer success is one that's going to be automated through workflows. And those workflows are going to be very specific to take out a lot of the kind of the manual intervention and kind of broken pieces of these siloed functional teams. And what will happen is that every company at any moment in time will know not only who those accounts are, but also which ones are in market. And today we can say that, hey, within your target account list, we can say that there's, a percentage, and according to 6 Sense, it's usually around 2.5% of your target account list is actually looking for a solution. Why is this important for sellers? Well, if I'm a seller and a company is just more in the awareness stage and they're not going to be buying for 6 months or 8 months, maybe I shouldn't spend a lot of time reaching out to them. And where this is going is that every day or week, sellers will have a really good understanding of, hey, these are the accounts in my patch that are ready to buy. I mean, these ones are more in the awareness phase, and therefore you want to make sure that I'm partnered up with marketing and that they're getting more like brand messages so that when they go into market, we're the first company that gets considered.
Yeah. I think that's the key, right? That's why I continue to push on this, that I think, a lot, at least the SDR, BDR function, almost at this point needs to be seen as a marketing function. And It's about awareness. It's about impression points. It's about adding value without always saying, hey, what's the best way to get 15 minutes on your calendar type of bullshit. And if we treat it that way, we actually release a lot of the pressure from the SDR org to produce, these arbitrary metric results of activities and bullshit meetings that just get flipped over, and we can focus on quality. I mean, I said it before, I'll say it again. The number one thing that we can do to align sales and marketing is just take away attribution.
Amen.
Give it where we go. Now, the problem with that is commission. So I'm actually pushing on this. I'm putting together, going back to the deep research, and because I've been always struggling with the SDR role in general. Like I built my career off of it, and I think SDR, I think it's the hardest job in sales by far.
Is. Yeah.
But it made sense back when predictable revenue, grow at all costs, money was free effectively. And when sales reps stayed at the organization for more than a year, right? But now sales reps SDRs stay less than 1.6 years. Now that I've done this research, they stay less than at that company. Forget about the position.
Yeah.
Position is 1.4. The company is 1.6. So they don't even become your AEs. And the ones who stay, less than 50% of them actually become AEs. So the model of cheap labor early that you can use to develop that model's over. Like that value of that is done. So therefore, let's reshape the entire SDR org here. And I almost want to create like an apprenticeship program here. Whereas I don't know about you, but like I got into Xerox, right? Back in the day, you went to an account, like before you got territory, before you got any of that, you literally went to like an 8-week sales training program, right? Or a 1-year apprenticeship where you learn the business, you learned how to do it and that type of thing. I think we need to get back to that. I think we need to get back to treating it as almost like a go-to-market function. And you come in, you get salaried role. You then get to do a bunch of stuff. Yeah, you can send some emails. You can do your data research. You understand how the tools work, but you also understand business. And you have to work with some clients, understand use cases. Then maybe after the first year, if you got the itch to get a little bit more higher comp and okay, well, put me in the bullpen for the cold calling side of the house so I can actually make cold calls now. But then after the second year, you pick a lane. It's almost like when you go to college. I went to University of Maryland. And the main reason was because they didn't force me to declare my major in the first 2 years.
Oh, cool.
Because I didn't know what the fuck I wanted to do. Yeah. So this is an idea. My idea here is like make the first year a pure salaried role cost of sale. But then after that first year, the rep can pick a lane. Hey, I think I want to go into direct sales. Hey, I think I want to go into marketing. Hey, I think I want to go into customer success. Hey, I think I want to go into operations or even enablement.
Yeah.
And then they start to work in that. And that construct to me makes a hell of a lot more sense than what we got right now. Because this is a fucking mess what we're in right now.
So first of all, Xerox for a long period of time was viewed as having the best sales organization in the world. And many of our leading CEOs today come from that environment. So examples being McDermott at ServiceNow, as well as Howard Schultz. He graduated through that program. And so what I've witnessed on my journey is most of the SaaS companies I've worked with have been very inadequately prepared or have invested in the training of what I'd argue is one of our most important functions. And in absence of that training, I'd love your thoughts on it. But I was always under the impression that the journey to an AE, from my perspective, absence of the training, should really be more of an account management function, because you actually learn how the client's using the product, what the product can and can't do. And having been, in kind of, knee deep, kind of fighting the battles with the customer and trying to help them be successful and working with the product team, that really sets you up to be an amazing seller.
Oh, without question. I forget, I terrible memory, but there was somebody out on the podcast a long time ago. And that model was my first, this was actually before the AI and all this stuff kind of threw a loop into everything. But he had said he lets the, SDRs, right? You're going to come in, junior rep, you're going to beat the shit out of you, you're going to make some calls, whatever it is. But then instead of going to an AE, because the challenge with that is, if you're a company like Salesforce, it makes sense because you have enterprise, mid-market, SMB, and then VSB. You have very small businesses. So you go from an SDR doing the kind of at the front end of the sales process, making calls. And when you get promoted down to a VSB AE. Okay. Right. So a very small business. So you learn how to close, but there's not a lot of stress to it. You know what I mean? It's transactional kind of. So you kind of get in, and if you lose a deal, you lose a deal. Who gives a shit? Then you get promoted to the mid-market and move forward. Right. Most companies don't have that size and breadth to be able to create that learning path. So they take a SDR after a year, then throw them into mid-market or enterprise full cycle sales. And these kids are freaking slaughtered. That's the drop off that you see. Like the amount of people that fail between SDRs and AEs is drastic. So if what he did was he took the SDRs and he became account managers, customer success, and they sat and they listened to use cases, understood what happened when a dipshit sales rep sold the wrong thing and the pain that caused. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so now when they then they could stay in CS or AM if they wanted to, but then, okay, a year later, now they're an AE. Yeah. And now they have empathy, they have use case conversations, they have, true understanding of the value of the product. And I thought that was genius. I'm like, you know what? That's the transition out of this horrible, predictable revenue model that we're in right now. That would be a shift. But now I think we got to reshape this altogether. That first 2 years is we have to basically now create it, I think, as an expectation that it's effectively your MBA. Like you go to school for 4 years, you're going to come here for 2, and we're going to give you an MBA on go-to-market. And if we accept that as a cost, if you churn after that, okay, whatever, it is. But if you make that fucking program off the charts and you add so much value to that kid's life, they're probably going to stay on.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more with you, John. Like in terms of when I think about the teams that I've been a part of and the leaders I like to follow, they're ones that actually, in many respects, they invest a tremendous amount in me and my development. And there's situations where I've stayed in jobs, not because it was the right company or even, I wasn't making the money I wanted, but I had an amazing fucking leader. And I knew that my time with that leader was one in which there was this intangible value that would help me for the next 20. And so, like some of the, the most important mentors in my life have been bosses. And, like going back to kind of like the transactional nature of go to market today, I think the real opportunity right now for leaders is actually leaning into investing in your people, helping them build a great career. And if you do so, they will return just massive amounts of, success in terms of not only just crushing the number, but helping you and your mission to build a great company.
I think that was one thing I learned. I know it's a little old school these days with Jack Welch and GE, right? Because they were pretty great. Everybody hates them now, but
Yeah.
the whole Good to Great. If you read Good to Great, I think it was either Good to Great or Built to Last. Built to Last, Good to Great, one of the two. But I think the Good to Great was when they had this process, this system for development of a CEO. So it wasn't just like, okay, when the old CEO's retiring, well, let's pick one. They literally had a program, like a multi-year, 5-year, 4-year program that produced leaders and CEOs. And what was funny is at the end, you got down to like the 2 or 3 that were like, holy shit. And they were all incredible.
Yeah.
And then it was the choice of, okay, we chose Jack. Well, the other 3 people that went through that with Jack to get to the CEO level, CEO of a Home Depot, CEO of this, they became, and so that's the legacy. And I wish more companies would think of it that way. It's like to a certain degree, legacy of what you're trying to bring to the table here. You're not just trying to, hit your revenue numbers and get your IPOs and good for you and you make your fucking cash, good for you. Like if you want to create something real and a legacy, well, you create a system that produces greatness.
Yeah.
And that loyalty comes back to you in referrals, in NPS scores, in customer sat. You know what I mean? All of that shit. People say, all customers, fuck off. Yes, customers, but they're not always right. Fuck you that the customer's always right. And there's been multiple times in my career where I'm like, bullshit, you are an asshole. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so people say, oh, you treat your customers and you'll never, no, you treat your employees.
Yeah.
Because if you focus on your employees being happy, your customers are going to be happy. Like, it's obvious. So I think that's where we get to shift this entire thing, in my opinion, to get back to fucking matters, going back to ICPs. Who's the ones that actually matter? Who gives a shit how big the TAM is? What are the 50 companies that if we got them would make us the most profitable and effective company in the world? Like those are the ones that we should focus on. We should build our whole GTM around that, which I think I'm preaching the choir here, but I'm also trying to wake people up right now because I think this volume play, man, is a race to the bottom. It's just a race to the bottom.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. Today, I got an email that was inviting me to speak on a podcast about what was fascinating about it. It was related to SaaS, but it talked about skincare. And what's clear to me is that AI wrote it. The person that sent it didn't even bother to check it. And there was this random shit in there. And I was
like, I'm curious now. And then you're like, no, it was just a fuck up. Yeah,
I can share the email if you want to see it. But it's almost like every day, it's almost comical because these things are showing up in my inbox. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
huh?
Yeah, like you need to.
My version of that is of LinkedIn comments.
Okay.
Right. So like I'll post something and obviously, bing, 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 linked, there's all this stuff. And I look at it, I'm like, did you read the post or because that's a pretty obscure comment on that. Okay. But it's so obvious. That's why automation, augmentation, right? Everybody who's looking to automate, I think is just automating themselves out of a job, but that's, man, this is a superpower. So hopefully we can be there for the bridge, my friends, because we're all living a legacy model right now and we're all moving into a new one. Just nobody knows what it is. So I appreciate the conversation. Tell people where they can find out more information, more about what you're doing, because I do think this is, and also talk about your ICP, right? I know we were talking about doing some work together, and I'm a little bit more the PLG and getting some businesses to work it, even though I work with enterprise. Who's the best suited, and where can they find out information about you?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you giving me this opportunity, John. So in terms of the best place to learn more about what we're doing and ultimately how we can help revenue leaders be more successful, our website's a good place. There's it's AlignICP.com, and there's a section in there where it says learn more. And it's basically our blog post, but what's great about it is it gets deep into the frameworks and ideas and illustrates how we're trying to help revenue leaders be more successful. In terms of our ICP, we'll start on more the company side. We're 100% focused on B2B SaaS companies, ones that probably have over $10 million in ARR, probably all the way up to maybe $500 million. In terms of our personas that we care most about, I'm being really intentional when I use this word. It's a revenue leader. And so it's an individual that needs to contribute to building repeatable, scalable growth. The folks that we tend to naturally gravitate towards it's a combination. It's not just one. It's a CMO. It's a VP of RevOps that's trying to do this work, but struggling, and potentially a CRO that owns not only new logo bookings, but also retention and expansion.
Got it. Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate what you're doing because it's a weird, going back to vertical, right? About that. That was an interesting one. Could you remind me, it's 40% of their vertical, they spend 40% less to get the client, even though and they're just as profitable? Is that the number?
Yeah. And so just to run through those numbers one more time. And so the study was based on two populations of public SaaS companies. And so the populations were constrained such that David looked at accounts that had similar growth rates. So it was right around 18%, and then companies that were right around the same size. And so I think there was maybe 700 million ARR. And so from there, what was looked at was the percentage of revenue that is allocated towards sales and marketing. And so on average, the horizontal company is spending something like 41% of every dollar goes into sales and marketing, whereas with vertical SaaS, it's right around 22%.
Wow. Yeah, that's impressive. That is impressive. 41 versus 22. Good. Okay. Awesome, man. Well, again, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate the conversation. It was a fun one.
Yeah, man. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, everybody, hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did and got you to think a little bit about your own ICP and go and do a little bit of homework there to figure out if you're focusing on the right ones. Not wasting your time on people that will never buy from you. But regardless, like I always say, all these podcasts here, go out there and make somebody smile today. Because no matter how bad your day went or how bad you think it's going, you make somebody smile today and you know you had a good day, and the world needs a lot more of that right now. So thank you all very much, and I will see you on the other side. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. With your support and our incredible guests, we're one of the top sales podcasts out there right now, and I can't thank you enough. Now, to keep the momentum going, it would mean the world to me if you could go and leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform and share some of your favorite episodes with your network. Also, I am super excited to be launching my new newsletter, where I'll be sharing everything I know and everything I'm learning along the way while I'm out there selling every day just like you. Go to jbarrows.com/newsletter to sign up today. Let's all level up and make this happen together.